We're all set. So can everybody hear us okay?
Yeah. Testing, we're good.
Good. So as you know, this was the title of the paper, Should Right Societies Pursue Equity? And as we're kind of pursuing this question, we're going to push your buttons. I'm going to move around here a little bit. We're going to say some things that will make you unhappy, some things that will make you smile. You may want to throw vegetables at us. I don't know. The first button we're going to push is one we call risk versus reward. Sort of how do societies balance this tension between uncertainty and certainty as they work on licensing deals? The second button is around this premise of the tortoise versus the hare, or if you're Will, you'll say the tortoise versus the hare. Would you prefer to be paid now or be paid later? And also, would you prefer for the music or the online music market to grow now and quickly, or over time and more slowly? How does that play out over time? And the third button we call choke versus stoke. And that essentially is when you consider how licensing schemes are structured and the fact that online users of music and these licensing schemes are not independent. The growth of both industries are kind of interdependent. What are the things that we might do that stoke these industries, help them grow more quickly, or choke off those industries, kind of squelching opportunities before they emerge? But first we're going to do a little flashy introduction. I have to see the screen. This is tough.
Okay. So here's a paper that we published over a year ago. And the great things about the PRS is not just providing analytical support to my colleagues, such as Jeremy Fabini over there, but also providing insight to the business overall. And I got to collaborate with Dave on this question. And the goal of this paper was to approach a contentious topic, but avoid the knee-jerk reactions. Okay? And Dave, you want to just take us through what we found?
Yeah, so if you've traveled the underground in London, you're familiar with this phrase, mind the gap. It's ubiquitous and perhaps even just overused. But we noticed that if you think of the growth in user base of startups, say along the bottom from left to right, and the revenues and royalties along the left from bottom to top, a gap was emerging, where essentially what users owed for the use of music was clearly exceeding what they were able to make in terms of revenue. And we thought this gap might actually be a problem. And the question was, when would these lines converge? When would these startups go from basically cash flow negative to cash flow positive? Now, the context for the paper is important as well. Remember that AOL had recently acquired Bebo for approximately $850 million US. CBS had recently acquired Last.fm for $280 million US. And this was all in the deep wake of Google, which had acquired YouTube for $1.65 billion. I don't have $1.65 billion, but they do. And unfortunately, the amount paid to PROs and their members was in general approximately zero prior to these acquisitions. And it didn't matter, kind of which currency you used to calculate the value, right? Or used Will's favorite currency.
That's a legal tender, by the way, okay?
The sweet Foxtrot Alpha. So we began to wonder to ourselves, should right societies pursue equity? And beyond kind of this normative question, the right and the wrong of pursuing equity, would right societies pursue equity? Given the history, the structure, and the mindset of these organizations, we can't ignore that. And also, could right societies pursue equity, given how these organizations are governed by management, membership, and regulation? Because most of you are not for-profit organizations. You're not-for-profit organizations. That was hard to pull off, sorry. And then recently, YouTube was ordered by a court to pay ASCAP about $1.6 million US for their past usage of music, and about $840,000 per annum for music use ongoing. And we began to wonder again, is 1% of $1.65 billion greater than $1.6 million, which was the payoff?
Calculators?
Yeah, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the answer is yes, actually. You'd be better off if you took the percentage rather than the dollar value. So we return to the question for this session, should right societies pursue equity? And that's the end of the flashy intro. So, Will?
Yeah, let's assume that the room is not full of economists, but we need to get a concept across from economics to the audience so we can work through this debate. And the concept is?
So in a trade-off, we were all economists in the room. We would make all our decisions based upon trade-offs. All right? And we would oftentimes draw out these trade-offs in kind of a two-dimensional space with two axes such as this. And it'd be things like this versus that. Or should we produce some apples or oranges? Or labor versus leisure. Should I sit on my butt or should I go out and do some work? And in this presentation, like we noted earlier, we're going to talk about 3 trade-offs. And these are the 3 buttons that we mentioned earlier: risk-reward, tortoise versus the hare, choke versus stoke. And the first button, risk versus reward. So in kind of a rational, competitive environment, it's assumed that this relationship between risk and reward in the marketplace kind of plays along some sort of line. And the line plays out like this. If you take a really big risk, you should be offered in exchange a very large reward. Very simple concept. If you take a very little risk, then you should conversely or appropriately receive a much smaller reward. So the reward is proportionate to the risk that you take in the marketplace. And now we ask, as a startup, from the startup side of the equation, we'll say, if the deal terms include an advance of monies, a per-user minimum, a revenue guarantee, so you're guaranteeing that it's all going to add up to X every year, this, that, and the other, and then you throw some equity in too, if you're a rights user, like some of us have been, quite frankly, when you're asked the question, hey, where's the risk in this deal? You're saying, well, it's sitting right on me. It's on us, the rights users. There's a lot of risk on our table. Now,
this took a while to get. Conversely, fine for the rights user, but how does the rights holder approach this situation? Let's just look at the deal terms here. I've got a percentage of revenue, and I'm going to sign here, and the revenue is 0. Okay, so I'm going to allow the opportunity cost of you to exploit my repertoire and produce no cash, and I'm getting a percentage of no cash. The risk for me is right there.
The rights holder in this case. So, and as we're looking at this problem with both sides of this deal, both parties are clearly feeling like they're taking more risk than the other, and that's that tension that's now continually emerging in the industry. And now we'll move on to our second button, tortoise versus the hare.
All right, on this one here, hopefully the translators are able to explain what the tortoise-hare story is. But we asked this question, and it's one of the great things, and credit to Emmanuel Legrand and Eric Baptiste at CISAC, because this debate is, this whole conference so far is doing these self-reflecting questions here. Which one are you in this music industry ecosystem? Are you the tortoise or the hare? It's a good time to ask that question here in Washington today. So we go on to our next one here, because artists and managers like these really want to know, and I just want to flag up that this has happened in the UK, and things like this are happening elsewhere. The Featured Artists Coalition, it's great that we've got Jeremy Silver here as well, is representing the rights of those artists and producers. And behind their lobbying campaign is a simple question. Given the complexity of the deals going on today, with equity, advances, multi-territorial licensing, this digital marketplace, how on earth do these guys get paid? It's an intuitive question to ask. So to be aware that that tension exists. But regardless of what you think or do about this thorny issue of equity, you may have already made up your mind before coming in today, you have to appreciate the following points.
Even if your answer is no, equity deals have been done, and they will be done, and they will continue to be done. So whether you do them, someone else will. And we're seeing that now play out in the marketplace as some prior deals are being renegotiated to so-called friendlier deal terms. We'll let some other people comment to whether they're friendlier or not. Or maybe they won't comment. So now to the final button that we're going to push. Hopefully we've pushed a few. Choke versus stoke. And to explain this is kind of a basic premise for how internet startups kind of earn their keep. So we're going to play off this trade-off between revenue and users, and that's what users look like, in case you've never seen some. But we're going to represent them with the letter U in this trade-off scheme, and the dollar sign. I'm sorry, I'm very American, I guess. The dollar sign will be revenue or maybe royalties. So think of it in either terms. So as these organizations kind of grow, it's somewhat assumed that they grow in this kind of one-to-one relationship between users and revenue. Every new user is worth a little bit more. And it's kind of a linear thing. As they grow, they should go quickly and in a straight line. But in reality, growth looks more like this. As the user base grows, revenue slowly tweaks up as the user base gets beyond 1 million or a few million. And in fact, in harsh reality in which we're operating now, the number of users required in order to really kind of exploit that user base, in order to essentially gather the attention of advertisers so they are willing to spend dollars on an ad-supported site, the number of users has to be tremendous. A number that's actually larger than many of the media companies with which you might traditionally deal, television stations, radio stations in your world. Now, if we take the users off the bottom line and kind of throw them up into the middle of the diagram here, it's sometimes assumed that when startups grow, they also grow in sort of this linear sort of way. But having done the startup thing, if you grow like this, that's kind of cool. It never really happens. In reality, or in the reality of startups that matter, the ones that are most likely going to be successful,